Most people learn the Monroe Doctrine as a warning to Europe. Stay out of the Americas. But doctrines don't stay frozen in time. They evolve with power. But what began as a defensive statement in 1823 became a justification for intervention, regime change, and economic control. And today, it's being rebranded in a way that should concern every country in the hemisphere, including Canada. This is the story of the Monroe Doctrine, how it changed, and what the so-called Dunroe Doctrine means for us now. I'm your host, Pierre Shields. This is North of MAGA. Let's dive in. What the Monroe Doctrine really said. In 1823, U.S. President James Monroe addressed Congress with what later became known as the Monroe Doctrine. The message had three core points. No new European colonization in the Americas, no European interference in newly independent states. In exchange, the United States would stay out of European wars. At the time, this sounded like a pro-independence declaration. Latin American nations had just broken free from Spain. On paper, it looked like protection. But words and power are not the same thing. The unspoken reality of 1823. In 1823, the United States was not yet a global power. It lacked the navy and military reach to enforce the doctrine. The real enforcement came from Britain. The British Navy wanted open trade in the Americas and didn't want Spain or France returning. The Monroe Doctrine conveniently aligned with British interests. So, from the beginning, the doctrine was diplomatic, not legal, strategic, not altruistic, and backed by power that wasn't even American. As U.S. power grew, the meaning of the doctrine changed, from shield to sword. By the early 20th century, the United States was no longer a junior power. Under Theodore Roosevelt, the Monroe Doctrine evolved into the Roosevelt Corollary. The U.S. now claimed the right to intervene in Latin American countries to prevent instability or foreign influence. In practice, this meant military occupations, overthrow of governments, control over customs and finances, and protection of U.S. corporate interests. The doctrine stopped being about keeping Europe out and became about managing the hemisphere. Cold War enforcement. Any government that stepped outside Washington's orbit risked intervention. The U.S. backed or installed friendly regimes across Latin America and the Caribbean. This included support for dictatorships when they aligned with U.S. interests and opposition to elected governments when they didn't. The pattern was consistent. Stability over democracy, alignment over sovereignty, and economics and security intertwined. The doctrine had fully transformed into a system of control. The Dunroe Doctrine. Fast forward to today. U.S. President Donald Trump has openly reframed this tradition, jokingly calling it the Dunroe Doctrine. Funny, yeah? But behind the joke is a serious shift. The Dunroe Doctrine strips away diplomatic language and replaces it with transactional logic. It replaces rules with leverage, alliances with loyalty tests, and shared institutions with bilateral pressure. Under this mindset, the Western Hemisphere is not a partnership. It's a hierarchy. Align with U.S. priorities or face consequences. Those consequences don't require troops. They can be tariffs or sanctions or supply chain restrictions or security cooperation withdrawals. Power no longer needs to invade. It can disable. What this means for Canada. Canada has always assumed it was safely inside the Monroe Doctrine, a trusted ally, not a subject. The Dunroe Doctrine challenges that assumption. Under this framework, Canada is a junior partner whose access is conditional on trade compliance, defense procurement choices, energy policy, and foreign alignment. We've already seen the warning signs. Tariffs justified as national security, pressure over defense spending and aircraft choices, rhetoric questioning Canada's reliability, an open discussion of redefining borders and obligations. This isn't theoretical, it's structural. Canada's economy, defense systems, and supply chains are deeply integrated with the United States. Integration brings efficiency, but also vulnerability. In a crisis, pressure doesn't have to be military. It can be administrative, contractual, and logistical. The real risk, dependency, not invasion. The danger isn't tanks crossing borders. Not yet anyway. It's having key systems that can be turned off. Doctrines don't disappear, they evolve. They don't announce themselves as imperial. They call themselves pragmatic. Conclusion. The Monroe Doctrine was about keeping others out. The Dunroe Doctrine is about keeping others in line. For Canada, The lesson isn't anti-American. It's pro-sovereignty. Allies matter, but autonomy matters too. The question Canada must ask isn't who our allies are. It's what we control and what we don't. Because in the modern world, power doesn't always invade. Sometimes it just switches things off. Thanks for spending time with me. This has been North America. I'm your host, Pierre Shields. Go play outside.